We know by now that human rights protection cannot be effective without gathering information to establish whether a violation has occurred or not. As stated by Jonathan Kuttab, a human rights lawyer from Israel and Palestine, information documentation and dissemination of accurate details of the violations of human rights remain our single most powerful and most effective weapon in fighting for human rights. He further states, to be an effective first line of defense and protection of human rights, we must first insist on the quality of the information we gather. Our information must be truthful, accurate, and detailed. We must never forget that our adversaries have tremendous resources and direct access to the media and news agencies, which always feel compelled to at least give the authorities' versions of every event. Therefore, our use of information and documentation in the protection of human rights can only be as effective as that information is accurate, detailed, credible, and reliable. To the extent that our information is not of sufficient high quality, the authorities will certainly be able to point out its deficiency and use that fact to discredit our entire efforts. Before we go on to the basic principles governing fact-finding, let's do an exercise. Spend a few moments reflecting on the questions given on screen. Note down your answers. The questions are: what do you think are some of the basic principles that should govern fact-finding activity? Or in other words, what are some of the things that you think, as a fact finder, you should bear in mind before planning a fact-finding activity? Let's review some of the basic principles in any fact-finding activity. Fact-finding needs to be thorough, accurate, and impartial. It must not only be impartial and accurate, it must be perceived as such as well. If this principle is not followed, there is danger that the results of the fact-finding will not appear credible or reliable. Fact-finding must be conducted with precise focus. This means that the scope of investigation in the fact-finding must be well defined. Fact-finding must use clear criteria for determining the reliability of information. Fact-finding must state whether the information is based on first-hand information or secondary sources. We will discuss this point in detail in Lesson 3. Those engaged in fact-finding must be open-minded while reviewing evidence. This means that fact-finders must avoid starting their mission with a theory about the incident and pursue only those facts that prove their theory and ignore the ones that point to another understanding. Reports of fact-finding not conducted with an open mind do not seem credible. They carry little weight and may even harm the cause of the victims. It is important to remember that the first and foremost duty of human rights workers is towards the victims of human rights violations. Fact-finding work must not cause any harm to the victims. The victims or people affected or witnesses who provide crucial information should always be consulted on matters that affect them, such as the disclosure of information received and actions to be taken based on the information provided. It is important to consider the security and welfare of people who provided the information. Fact-finding causes considerable intrusion into people's lives. While some may be interested in highlighting a human rights problem, others may simply want to get on with their lives. Fact-finders must bear this in mind and be respectful of such sentiments. Finally, fact-finding must be conducted with utmost respect and empathy for the victims. Efforts should be made to understand the experiences of the people and not merely gather data. These were some of the basic principles. Now refer back to your answers. How many of these principles were you able to identify? If more than five, then you have an understanding of the fundamentals of fact finding.